Nobody in that arena expected what was about to happen. The lights were low. The crowd was restless. Thousands of people had already sat through a long night of performances, some brilliant, some forgettable. The judges were tired. Simon Cowell sat back in his chair the way he always does when he doesn't expect to be surprised. Arms crossed. Expression unreadable. A man who has heard everything. Then the name was called. SB19. A few people in the crowd cheered. Most didn't know who they were. 5 young men from the Philippines, a country that the world's biggest stage had never truly given its full attention to. They walked out not with arrogance, not with manufactured confidence, but with something different, a quiet, unshakable belief in themselves that was almost painful to watch, because you could feel how much this moment meant to them. They had not traveled thousands of miles to perform. They had traveled thousands of miles to prove something. And what they were about to prove would silence every single person in that building. The music started. It wasn't the kind of opening that grabs you immediately. It built slowly, the way a storm builds on the horizon, you feel it before you see it. The first notes were soft, almost fragile. Then the harmonies layered in, one by one, each voice finding its place in something larger than any single voice could carry alone. The crowd began to lean forward without realizing it. Something was happening. Something real. Simon Cowell uncrossed his arms. That alone told you everything. Here's what most people don't know about SB19. They didn't start with resources. They didn't start with connections. They started in a small practice room in Manila, training for years under conditions that would have broken most people. Rejected repeatedly. Told their sound wasn't commercial enough. Told they were too Filipino for the global market. Told to change who they were if they wanted to succeed. They refused. Every rejection made them sharper. Every closed door made them push harder. And by the time they stepped onto that AGT stage, they weren't just performing a song, they were performing every single moment of sacrifice that had led them there. Every late night. Every doubt. Every person who had told them no. You could feel it in the music. The performance shifted. What had started as something tender began to build into something enormous. The choreography was precise, but it never felt mechanical, it felt alive, each movement an extension of the emotion they were channeling. The crowd, which had been politely attentive moments before, began to stir. People were sitting up straighter. People were reaching for their phones. People were looking at each other with that expression that only appears when something unexpected is happening, that look that says, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" One woman in the front row pressed both hands to her mouth. On stage, SB19 never broke. Their eyes were present. Their energy was controlled and explosive at the same time, the way the most powerful performances always are, you can feel them holding something back even as they give everything. The lead vocal soared into a register that filled every corner of that massive arena, and the harmonies beneath it were so tight, so perfectly balanced, that it stopped feeling like 5 separate people and started feeling like one single voice with 5 different colors. The crowd erupted. Not politely. Not in the measured way audiences respond when something is good. They erupted the way people do when they've witnessed something they know they'll remember for the rest of their lives. The sound was physical, you could feel it in your chest. People were on their feet before the song had even finished. There was screaming. There were tears. There were people who had never heard of SB19 20 minutes ago now completely undone by what they had just witnessed. Simon Cowell said nothing. He just watched. And the expression on his face, the man who built his entire career on being impossible to impress, was something none of the audience had seen on him in years. It wasn't his usual careful neutrality. It wasn't the slight smile he gives when something meets his standard. It was something rawer than that. Something almost reluctant, as if he hadn't wanted to be moved, and had been moved anyway. When the music stopped, the silence lasted exactly 1 second. Then the building came completely apart. The judges rose one by one. Not because they were supposed to. Not because the moment called for a performative gesture. They rose because something in them had no other response. The standing ovation wasn't a formality, it was an acknowledgement. A recognition. 5 people from a country that the global entertainment industry had consistently underestimated had just walked into the most competitive performance arena in the world and owned it completely. Howie Mandel was the first to speak. He leaned into his microphone and said the word that every artist dreams of hearing from a stage like that what he had just witnessed was not just talent but something beyond talent. Something he hadn't seen coming. Something that changed the night. Sofia Vergara was crying. She wasn't hiding it. She looked at the 5 men on stage and said that watching them perform felt like watching something that was meant to happen, and she had been lucky enough to be in the room when it did. Heidi Klum could barely get the words out. She said SB19 had just proved that music has no borders, no language barriers, no nationality requirements, that what they had given the audience transcended all of it. And then Simon spoke. The arena went quiet. Because when Simon Cowell decides to speak after a performance like that, everyone understands that what comes next will define the moment. He has ended careers with a sentence. He has launched careers with a sentence. He looked at SB19 for a long moment before he said anything, and when he did, his voice had something in it that is almost never there. He said he had sat in that chair for many years. He said he had heard thousands of performances. He said that very, very rarely, so rarely he could count the times on one hand, something happened on that stage that reminded him why he had started doing this in the first place. Why music matters. Why performance matters. Why it is worth putting yourself in front of millions of people and being completely vulnerable. He said SB19 had just given him one of those moments. The arena lost its mind. On stage, the 5 men from the Philippines stood together, and for just a moment, before they smiled, before they acknowledged the crowd, you could see on their faces what this cost them. What they had carried to get to this room. The years. The doubt. The distance from home. The weight of representing not just themselves but an entire country that had believed in them when the rest of the world hadn't started paying attention yet. And then they smiled. And the whole building felt it. This is what SB19 does. This is what has made them one of the most important acts in Asian music history, long before AGT, long before the global spotlight found them. They don't just perform. They make you feel something that you weren't expecting to feel. They reach into a room full of strangers and find the part of every person that is not a stranger at all, the part that knows what it feels like to want something, to work for something, to wonder if it will ever be enough. The buzz in the media started before the broadcast even aired. People who had been in that room were already talking. Already sharing. Already trying to describe something that ultimately defied description. The clip spread the way only the most genuinely viral moments spread. Not because an algorithm pushed them, not because a PR team manufactured it, but because person after person watched those few minutes of video and felt something shift inside them and immediately needed someone else to feel it too. The comment sections were unlike anything seen on an AGT clip in years. Thousands upon thousands of people, from every country imaginable, writing variations of the same thing. I don't cry at videos. I cried at this. I wasn't ready for this. I watched this 10 times and I still can't believe it's real. The Filipino community around the world wept openly and without apology. For years, Filipino artists had been told that the global market wasn't ready for them, that they would always be one step outside the room where the biggest conversations were happening. SB19 didn't just walk into that room. They built a new one. There are performances that are impressive. There are performances that are moving. And then, once in a very long while, there are performances that change something, that shift the air in a room, that rearrange how an audience understands what is possible. What can be felt. What music is actually for. What SB19 did on that AGT stage was the third kind. Simon Cowell knew it. The judges knew it. The thousands of people in that arena knew it. And now, the entire world knows it. Some moments are too big to contain in a single night. They spill out into the days after, and the weeks after, and they stay with you in the way that only the things that are truly real ever stay with you. This was one of those moments. And if you haven't seen it yet, you will understand everything the second you do.